SLT Mobitel, the connection.
මෙම විශේෂ සන්ලයිට් නිෂ්පාදන මිලදීගෙන ශ්‍රී ලාංකේය මනුදම්වියමන අපි සවිමත් කරමු. සන්ලයිට් කෙයා.
Tonight, be prepared. Further island-wide travel restrictions set to come into effect this Friday and next Tuesday. Not a stumbling block. Health Ministry spokesperson says COVID home treatment discussions still ongoing.
We are planning and we are developing the guidelines, but that does not mean that we have taken a decision.
Meanwhile, maternal health expert clears up virus impact on expectant mothers.
So once the baby is delivered, there is no issue of giving breast milk to the babies, even if you are having the COVID infection.
Just another racket. Sri Lankan Canadian academics say LTTE diaspora's refugee business behind Ontario's Tamil genocide bill.
Every refugee means $35,000 to $40,000 per person. I believe that Bill 104 is means of strengthening their claim.
They can afford it. UNICEF chief calls on the G7 and EU to donate 150 million vaccine doses to COVAX. All that and much more coming up on First at 9, this Monday, the 17th of May, 2021.
ඇල්කොහොල් අඩංගු hand sanitizer භාවිත කරන්න. ලෙඩ රෝග ඇති කරන විෂ බීජවලට එරෙහිව සටන් කරන්න. හඳුන්වා දීමේ මිල රුපියල් 350යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhammike Kanaka. Now, members of the public welcome the lifting of a 3-day travel restriction this morning, only to be met with more restrictions that will come into effect periodically in the week ahead. Accordingly, a complete island-wide travel ban will once again come into effect at 11 p.m. on Friday the 21st and remain in place until 4 a.m. on Tuesday the 25th. On Tuesday, people will be given until 11 p.m. that same night to prepare for another long stay at home as the restrictions come into effect once again, which will continue until Friday the 28th.
With the lifting of island-wide travel restrictions at 4 a.m. today, Sri Lankans went back to work while shops and retail stores reopened for consumers to restock essentials. However, public movements were still restricted, with the government's NIC number system coming into effect today. This meant that only people with 1, 3, 5, 7 and 9 as the last digits of their NIC numbers were permitted to venture out. Tomorrow, however, those with even numbers as the last digit of their identity card will be allowed to venture out. The limitations were introduced to ensure minimum public movements in public spaces as novel coronavirus cases continue to rise. Spot checks were conducted at towns across the island, with the police department having pledged to take a zero-tolerance policy against any violators of the new rule. Further, a nighttime travel ban will also remain in effect from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. every night until the 30th of this month. Meanwhile, with interprovincial travel still banned for members of the public, exemptions have been given to essential service providers, including fruit and vegetable transporters during this period. However, on Friday, the 21st of May, a complete island-wide travel ban will come into effect once again at 11 p.m. and remain in place until 4 a.m. on the 25th. Further, at 11 p.m. on the 25th, the entire country will once more be under travel restrictions until 4 a.m. on the 28th. Meanwhile, members of the public trying to get to work decried a lack of sufficient public transport facilities during their morning office commutes. Despite the Sri Lanka Railways operating 15 trains for essential office staff along the Bediatta, Kandy, Chilau and Ambepussa routes, significant delays were reported. Meanwhile, wholesale markets and dedicated economic centres also resumed normal operations this morning. In the meantime, Chief of the National Operations Centre for the Prevention of COVID-19, Army Commander General Shavendra Silva announced today that a total of 85 Grama Ninadari divisions across 11 districts were placed in isolation this morning. These included Grama Ninadari divisions in the Batiklo, Trincomalee, Kurunagala, Gampaha, Ratnapura, Gaul, Ampara, Kalutara, Matale, Polonnaruwa and Nuwara districts. The Army commander also announced that the Pudukkode Iruppu and Mulliyawili police divisions in the Mullaitivu district too are to be isolated from 11 p.m. today.
කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වහලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම.
අමුතු කේක් එක ටියාරා.
කියලා හැදෙවෝ වගේ.
Now then, the home treatment idea of COVID-19 patients seemed to have hit a snag. Health authorities today confirmed that the topic is still under discussion. However, they are still in the process of forming guidelines. The public health inspectors were not too keen on the home treatment plan as they cited lack of infrastructure to facilitate such a move. Though Sri Lanka's daily caseloads have been on the rise, the insistence of the health authorities is that there is still no community transmission of the virus in Sri Lanka.
The third wave of COVID-19 swept across Sri Lanka following the Sinhala and Tamil New Year season, catching everyone with their guard against the virus down. Daily infections, which were at around 150 prior to the festive season, increased dramatically over the weeks that followed the festivities, and so did the deaths. But health authorities are confident that Sri Lanka has not plunged into a community transmission stage.
We are taking every possible action to trace the contacts of those who are associated with positive patients and try to contain this. But if the situation is such that there is many reasons to admit that community spread has already taken place, most of these activities need to be changed. And at this moment, we do not have any evidence to warrant to change the strategy to any other level, because we are at this moment under control of the situation where all the cases and their contacts are detected, and then some are quarantined at home, some positive cases have been taken to the intermediate stations or hospitals, and some are awaiting transport.
Community transmission or not, the island's daily caseload yesterday was 2,275. The 8th consecutive day of new infections in excess of 2,000. Most of them came from the Western Province. The Colombo district returned to the top of the daily infections with 438 cases, while there were 410 fresh infections from Gampaha. Meanwhile, the Galle district accounted for 261 new cases, as Kalutara and Nuwara confirmed 241 and 179 infections respectively. Kurunegala also reported 138 cases and Kandy recorded 100. A further 445 new infections were confirmed across 18 other districts. 63 imported cases too were included among yesterday's caseload. As for today, 1,759 new novel coronavirus cases have been confirmed so far. The increasing patient numbers and the stress it puts the country's healthcare system under led to health professionals calling for home treatment for asymptomatic COVID patients. But the public health inspectors poured cold water over the idea, citing the lack of infrastructure at MOH level and logistical issues. Though it looked like the Ministry of Health initially brought into the idea, it now transpires that home care for COVID patients is a topic on the discussion table.
We have not taken any decision to look after the patient at home. However, we know that during this period, there is an unexpected, but there is a delay in sending the positive patients to treatment centers. So until such time, we need to monitor their situation, and then if anyone needs any type of urgent treatment, we need to identify them. To monitor that, there is a plan to develop a system so that they can be monitored. However, at this moment, government, health ministry are exploring all the possibilities of any extreme eventuality where the home-based treatment also an option. However, for that, although we are taking all the action to develop plans, circulars, guidelines and other things, we are planning and we are developing the guidelines. But that does not mean that we have taken a decision.
In the meantime, a group of inmates at the Bogambara prison launched a protest atop the roof of the prison this morning. Nearly 40 inmates demanded expedited PCR testing and bail. It had been abundantly clear across the world that vaccination together with the adherence to health protocols is the only way to overcome the pandemic. With Sinopharm vaccine doses from China's donation still at hand, the national immunization program continues in the Western Province. People in the areas of Borala, Ratmalana, Moratuwa, Athidiya, Kalaniya and Gampa were given the jab throughout the day. As things stand, over 1.5 million people have received at least the first dose of the vaccine against COVID-19. With the limited number of AstraZeneca jabs at hand, 1,612 persons were given the second dose of the vaccine yesterday. It meant that a total of 267,077 people have been completely immunized with the AstraZeneca vaccine. As for the Sinopharm vaccine, 26,697 Sri Lankans were given the first dose yesterday. 372,451 persons in total have received the China-manufactured jab to date ever since it was approved in the island. As the UK variant of COVID-19 presently wreaking havoc in Sri Lanka is more virulent than the other strands in the island had to contend with before, the risk factor has spiked across all sectors of the society. One such faction is expectant mothers. But vaccinating expectant mothers against COVID isn't that simple. Director of Maternal and Childcare at the Family Health Bureau, Dr. Chitra Mali De Silva, says that the possibility is being discussed at present. But if the mothers are vaccinated after delivery, what would that mean for breastfeeding?
WHO and UNICEF, all evidence says there is no harm of breastfeeding the baby after getting the COVID vaccination. Any postpartum mother or mother after a delivery can get the vaccine and continue breastfeeding their babies.
There, however, are some more questions. Can COVID-positive mothers who are not immunized breastfeed?
Mothers who are with COVID infection have delivered their babies successfully. Only 4 maternal deaths are reported so far. So once the baby is delivered, there is no issue of giving breast milk to the babies, even if you are having the COVID infection. But the mother has to be very careful about the personal protective measures, to always wear a surgical mask and not to associate with the baby too much, but you can continue breastfeeding the baby. The WHO and UNICEF evidence says that disease is not contracted through breastfeeding.
Just as the daily caseload has grown, thankfully so the recoveries. 1,307 COVID-19 patients were given the all-clear today to leave treatment centres, meaning 119,629 persons in total have overcome the virus in the island. That, however, still leaves 23,734 active cases in Sri Lanka.
Now, Chief of the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund has called on richer countries to donate around 150 million vaccines with the UN's COVAX facility, as doing so would not hamper their own domestic vaccination commitments. Henrietta Fore notes that health systems in countries such as Nepal, Sri Lanka and the Maldives are also struggling after compromising, or in fact promising, to provide 8.4 million doses of vaccine to Sri Lanka, which accounts for 20% of the target vaccination population. The COVAX has so far only managed to provide a paltry 264,000 doses to the island.
With the G7, some of the world's richest countries set to meet next month, Executive Director of the UNICEF, Henrietta Fore, urges them and the EU member states to donate just 20% of their available COVID vaccine supply over the next 3 months with the COVAX facility, which would amount to over 150 million doses. In a statement, Fore noted, though the COVAX facility will deliver its 65th millionth dose in the coming days, it should have been at least its 170 millionth, and by the next time the G7 leaders gather in the UK next month, and as a deadly second wave of COVID-19 will likely continue to sweep across India and many of its South Asian neighbours, the shortfall will near 100 million doses. She added, quote, "While the situation in India is tragic, it is not unique. Cases are exploding and health systems are struggling in countries near, like Nepal, Sri Lanka and Maldives, and far like Argentina and Brazil," unquote. While iterating that India's spike in new cases has had global consequences, Fore says that soaring domestic demand there has meant that 140 million doses intended for distribution to low and middle income countries through the end of May cannot be accessed by COVAX, with another 50 million doses likely to be missed in June. Pointing to new data and analysis, she says the G7 nations and Team Europe group of European Union member states could donate around 153 million vaccine doses if they shared just 20% of their available supply over June, July and August. This, she says, they can do while still meeting their commitments to vaccinate their own populations.
Now, the passing of Canada's Ontario Assembly's Tamil Genocide Education Week bill has been a topic of controversy and concern since it came to be on the 6th. Some Sri Lankan-born Canadian academics are now weighing in on the matter, revealing the real reason for the LTTE diaspora's genocide claims. Speaking at a webinar organised to discuss the bill and its passing, the panellists said that the move aims to garner Western sympathy that will open the gates for more LTTE funds to be earned from its lucrative refugee racket.
The Ontario Centre for Policy Research held a webinar yesterday featuring eminent Sri Lankan academics in Canada, where the subject of discussion was the recent Bill 104 passed by the Ontario Assembly calling for a Tamil Genocide Education Week. Speaking at the webinar, the panelists accused the Tamil diaspora of only working to further its political agenda and ignoring the plight of the Tamil community in the north in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic.
In March 11, MPP Scarborough, the sponsor of the Bill 104, organized the fundraiser. We estimated that around 200,000 and they have donated to the PC party as a campaign expense. So now, what is the situation in Sri Lanka? In Jaffna, the people are suffering for this COVID pandemic. What Indians are doing? All the Indian communities get together and they collected medical supply to help their fellow Indians. But in Canada, what happened? They completely ignored and forget about their fellow Tamils living in Sri Lanka. We need to question, are they having a real critical interest about the Tamils living in Sri Lanka? Actually not.
Let me first point out that the Tamil movements in Canada and all over the world, they are not humanitarian organizations. They are not interested in the suffering of the people in the northern part of Sri Lanka. In fact, after the war in 2009, you would have expected these organizations to rush to the north and help the Tamil people, but nothing of the sort happened. Instead of sending money or setting up industries, they said, oh, this part of the country is still ruled by Colombo. We don't want to support these northern territories until we have Elam. And their political movement started by claiming that the Sri Lankan government has carried out a genocide. Nobody has found mass graves, although a Tamil government dug up one grave in Mannar saying this is one of the graves where thousands of people have been buried. The samples of these skeletons were sent to Florida for DNA testing, and they found that these skeletons were in fact from the Portuguese era, when one of the Tamil leaders called Sankili killed all the Tamils who became Christians. That's the only evidence that we have.
Meanwhile, during the critical analysis of the alleged Tamil genocide claims, the panelists highlighted that the premise of pro-LTT group's claims is to engage in what they termed large-scale asylum fraud, which is a key component of the LTT diaspora's funding mechanisms.
No, now what happened was, after 2009, all the Western governments, they have stopped giving refugee status for the Tamils, especially come from Sri Lanka. So then, as example, previous years, data shows us roughly 20,000 Tamils were granted as refugees each and every year during the war period. Last few years, only 619 application has been granted. Now, they had to have another campaign, influence the asylum policy.
This is a political program carried out by the remnants of the LTTE because they want to carry on bringing refugees into this country, because every refugee means $35,000 to $40,000 per person. And I believe that Bill 104 is merely a means of strengthening their claim. So this is merely a way of keeping their money supplied.
Meanwhile, panelist Dr. Chandra Dharmavardhana also called the action by foreign governments against Sri Lanka a hypocritical game targeting the government that refuses to toe the line set out by the West, seeking to thwart Chinese influence on the global stage.
What is happening is a hypocritical game by the four governments which sponsored this action against Sri Lanka. So this is a deliberate Western movement which is being applied whenever the government in Sri Lanka is not towing the Western line. When the Sirisena government, which was in power with the blessings of the Western governments, there was very little action against Sri Lanka. But the moment the new government came into power, a very different picture comes into being. And of course, if the Sri Lankan government were to join the Western Quad, which is directed against China, and if the Sri Lankan government had signed the MCC Pact and the SOFA agreement, there would be no action in this manner. And there would have been probably even action against the LTT in those countries.
The Court of Appeal has ordered authorities not to move notorious criminal figure Elesuda from the Bursa prison, where he is currently detained. The directive was issued when a writ application filed by the mother of Gampola Vidanage Samantha Kumar, alias Elesuda, was taken up before President of the Court of Appeal Arjun Obesekara and Justice Priyantha Fernando today. The appeal court ordered prison authorities not to move the inmate from the Bursa prison until the 24th of May. President's counsel Ramesh De Silva, appearing for the petitioners, stated that as there had been several situations where suspects in police custody are escorted out and killed, his client fears her own son would face a similar fate. The court pointed out that it was necessary to issue notices to the respondents to consider such an interim order, and ordered that notices be issued to the Commissioner General of Prisons, Superintendent of the Bursa Prison, the IGP and the Attorney General. It has been decided to obtain the opinions of the general public on reforms needed to be made with regard to elections, electoral structures and election laws. The Parliamentary Select Committee to identify appropriate reforms of the election laws and the electoral system and to recommend necessary amendments has decided to allocate 1 month for the public to submit their comments on the matter when it met for the first time today. The committee is chaired by the Leader of the House, Minister Dinesh Gunawardena. Meanwhile, the Parliament will convene for 3 consecutive days this week, starting from tomorrow. Secretary-General of Parliament Dhammika Dasanaga said that the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Bill is scheduled to be taken up for debate on the 19th and the 20th of May. Accordingly, the bill will be taken up for debate on the 19th from 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. and will continue from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. on the 20th. We'll see you shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, Sri Lankan shares closed for a 4th session in a row, or higher for a 4th session in a row today, led by a rise in financial and industrial stocks as the CSE All Share Price Index ended 1.69% higher at 7,350.14. The S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks, meanwhile, gained 80.93 points to close at 2,950.45. Here's Dimantha Matthew with a brief report on today's market performance, followed by a currency update.
Today we saw a massive surge in the ASPI with the index climbing by around 122 points. So as the government takes things under control with the restrictions coming in place, some confidence levels is coming back into the investors, and with that we are seeing strong buying interest emerging in the stock market. So this week we've seen the index hitting 7,350 points, breaking the 7,300 barrier as well. With that, what we are seeing is a 3.5 week high in the all share price index. With it, we are seeing a lot of retail participation coming back into the market. Turnover was around 2.7 billion rupees today, which is rather moderate level turnover, slightly higher than the last week.
India today released a new drug to be used on hospitalized COVID-19 patients. The new drug, however, is said to be able to reduce patients' dependence on oxygen. But health experts are skeptical, questioning the efficiency that new drug might have on people owing to lack of sufficient data on human trials. Medical oxygen has been in short supply in India in face of the massive surge in COVID infections.
India's Ministers of Defence and Health released a new drug today, 2-deoxy-D-glucose, after clinical trials showed it aided the recovery of hospitalized coronavirus patients and reduced dependence on supplemental oxygen. The drug was jointly developed by India's state-run Defence Research and Development Organisation and Hyderabad-based Dr. Reddy's Laboratories Limited. However, health experts are skeptical about the efficiency the new drug might have on people, as they cited the lack of sufficient data on human trials conducted. Meanwhile, even though the number of daily cases go down in the country, India reported fatalities owing to the pandemic in the excess of 4,000 yesterday once again. A total of 4,092 COVID-19 related fatalities were reported by the Indian Ministry of Health. In the meantime, Nepal has turned to its mountaineers for help in the ongoing COVID-19 crisis in the country, asking them for their empty oxygen cylinders for medical refilling. Nepal saw a sudden surge in the cases of coronavirus, along with a surge in infection rate and a crunch of oxygen cylinders. The Nepal Mountaineering Association has asked for more than 400 climbers to bring back around 3,500 cylinders that may have been taken for expedition on Nepal's 8,000 meter plus peaks this season.
And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.